I'm Adrian. Welcome to another video in the series about SQL basics. You should already know how to write subqueries which return single and multiple values, how to use any and all, and how to write subqueries in the from clause. Today, we'll talk about yet another type, correlated subqueries. What are these? Let's find out together. You already know quite a few subquery types. You may have noticed that each time we first wrote two independent queries executed one after another, and then we merged them into a single query using a subquery. In other words, the subqueries we wrote were all independent of the main clause. We could always extract them from the query and run separately. Correlated subqueries, on the other hand, are always dependent on the main clause. In other words, you can't run a subquery without the main query. The database will simply return an error. Let's take a look at two simple tables. The first one is named country and contains a few countries from around the world. It only has three columns: ID, name and population. For instance, the country with ID 1 is Singapore and has a population of 5.7 million. The second table is named city and contains four columns: ID, name, population and country ID. For instance, the city with ID 2 is Madrid, has a population of 6.6 million, and has a country ID of 2, which points to the table country. Now, there are some so-called city-states in the world. They are countries which only consist of a single city, such as Monaco or Vatican City. Consequently, the population of such countries equals the population of their single cities. Let's find out if we have such city-states in our database using a correlated subquery. Look at the query you can now see on the screen. Let's try to read it together. We want to select the names of such countries that their ID equals the ID from the subquery. So, what does the subquery contain? We want to find the country IDs from table city such that the population of the city equals the population of the country, and the country ID is the same, but wait a second, of which country actually? And that's exactly what we call a correlated subquery. This country population from the subquery refers to the table country from the main outer query. We can say that the subquery is correlated with the main query because it refers to the information from the main outer query. Note that if we tried to run the subquery as an independent query, we would get an error. The database would complain that we tried to query the country table without putting it in the from clause. However, when we use the query as a subquery, then the country table is taken from the main query. Okay, let's run the query. As you can see, there is a single city-state in the database, which is Singapore. Let's take a look at another example. This time, we'll only work with the city table. We want to find the names of cities whose population is bigger than the average city population in the given country. Take a look at the example. The main outer query is pretty easy. We want to select the names of cities such that the population is bigger than some population calculated in the subquery. However, note what happens in the from clause. After the table name, which is city, we provide an alias for the table, which is basically any name we want, and we'll go for big city in this case. Now, inside the subquery, we want to find the average population among cities in the same country as the country of the city from the main query. So in the where clause, we used the following condition. The country ID of the big city from the main clause must equal the country ID from the subquery. Because the subquery uses the table city and the main query uses the table city too, we had to introduce a table alias to distinguish between these two in the where clause of the subquery. Without it, the database would think that we refer to the same thing twice. Now, if we run the query, we can see Madrid in the result. Excellent! Indeed, Madrid is bigger than the average city in Spain because it's essentially the biggest city in the country. Great, the query worked. So, to sum up, correlated subqueries are subqueries which refer to the main outer query and cannot be run as independent queries without the main query. In the future videos, we'll get to know more about them. Until then, subscribe to our channel and let's learn SQL together.